that had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. No species had ever defeated them. No species had ever even slowed them down. They moved from star to star like a plague, and wherever they went, civilizations died. They were monsters in every sense of the word. 9 feet tall, covered in black shells harder than steel, with 4 arms that ended in claws sharp enough to cut through armor. They came from a world of eternal darkness, a planet so dangerous that nothing survived unless it learned to kill everything else first. And they had learned that lesson better than any creature in the universe. They did not trade. They did not negotiate. They did not make friends or allies. They simply took what they wanted. Entire species had been erased from existence. Others had been reduced to slaves, working in factories until their bodies broke down. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones lived long enough to watch their children be born into chains. The Galactic Concord, a loose group of spacefaring species, existed only because they allowed it. The Concord was useful. It kept records of every inhabited world, every population count, every resource. They used these records like a menu, choosing which civilization to harvest next. Everyone in the galaxy knew the rules. When they came, you had 2 choices. You could surrender and hope they would be quick, or you could run and hope they would not follow. Fighting was not an option. Fighting only made them angry. Humanity learned about the 3 years after making first contact with the Galactic Concord. The Etherian ambassador, a being of light and crystal who served as their guide to galactic politics, explained the situation with something like pity in her voice. "You are new," she said. "You are small. You control only 12 star systems. They will not notice you for many years, perhaps many centuries. Use that time wisely. Build your defenses, prepare your evacuation routes, and pray they find someone else more interesting." Humanity listened. Humanity nodded. Humanity filed the information away and continued building colonies, mining asteroids, and dreaming of a future among the stars. They had 200 years of peace. Then they came to 442b. It was humanity's largest agricultural world, home to 18 million people who grew food for a dozen other colonies. The planet was covered in farms and orchards, rivers and forests. Children played in fields of golden wheat. Families gathered for harvest festivals. It was, by any measure, a good place to live. The fleet arrived without warning. 50 ships emerged from, each one larger than a city, bristling with weapons that could crack a planet's crust. They formed a ring around the world and broadcast a single message in every language known to the galaxy. "You have been selected. Prepare for processing." The colonial militia scrambled to respond. They had 12 patrol ships, designed for chasing pirates and rescuing stranded freighters. Against the harvester fleet, they might as well have been throwing rocks at a hurricane. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Governor Sarah watched from her office as the last militia ship exploded in a ball of fire. Around her, alarms screamed and people ran through the halls, trying to reach shelters that everyone knew would not protect them. They did not care about shelters. They dug people out of shelters like children digging insects from the ground. "Begin evacuation protocols," she said, knowing it was pointless. The civilian transports could not outrun interceptors, but she had to try. She had to do something. In orbit, watched the same battle from the bridge of her cargo hauler. The Star of Manila was not a warship. It was a flying warehouse, designed to carry grain and machinery between colonies. Had been loading supplies when they arrived, and now she was trapped, hiding behind one of 442b's moons while the monsters tore her world apart. She was 43 years old. She had been a pilot for 20 years. She had a husband on the surface, 2 daughters in school, and a mother who still sent her recipes for adobo even though had never learned to cook. In 11 minutes, she had lost all of them. The other cargo ships in her convoy were already running. Their captains were smart people who understood the math. You could not fight you could not save anyone by dying. The only logical choice was to escape, to survive, to carry news of the attack to Earth so that others could prepare. Understood the math too. She just did not care about it anymore. "Martinez," she said to her first officer, "get the crew to the escape pods." Martinez stared at her. "Captain." "Now that's an order." He did not argue. He had known for 15 years, and he had never seen that look in her eyes before. It was not anger. It was not grief. It was something colder and harder, something that had moved past all normal human emotions into a place where only one thing mattered. The crew evacuated in 4 minutes. Watched the pods drift away toward the planet's shadow, where they might escape detection long enough for rescue ships to arrive. Then she turned the Star of Manila toward the fleet. The command ship was easy to identify. It was the largest vessel, covered in spines and sensor arrays, hanging in the center of the formation like a spider in its web. The Hive commander would be on that ship, coordinating the harvest, deciding which humans would live as slaves and which would be processed for biological material. Pushed her engines to maximum. Alarms screamed warnings about reactor stress, about hull integrity, about a dozen other problems she no longer cared about. They detected her almost immediately. Interceptors turned to pursue. Weapons locked onto her ship. She was faster than they expected. Cargo haulers were not supposed to be fast, but had spent years modifying her engines, squeezing every bit of speed from them for tight delivery schedules. Now that speed served a different purpose. The interceptors fired. Her shields failed. Her hull began to tear apart. She was close enough now to see the command ship's engine array, a massive structure of glowing tubes and power conduits. "For my family," she whispered. Then she rammed the Star of Manila into the command ship and triggered her reactor's emergency overload. The explosion lit up the sky above 442B. People on the surface looked up and saw a new sun burning in the darkness, and for one moment, they felt something they had not expected to feel. Hope. The fleet survived. The harvest continued. 18 million humans were taken or killed, but something unprecedented had happened. For the first time in 3,000 years, a Hive commander had been killed in battle, killed by a single human in a cargo ship, killed by someone who had chosen death over helplessness. Across the galaxy, the Supreme Nexus received the report. The collective intelligence of the most feared species in existence processed the data and reached a conclusion that surprised even them. These humans were interesting. They warranted further study before harvesting. It was not mercy. They did not understand mercy. It was curiosity, the same curiosity a child might feel before pulling the wings off a fly. They had no idea what they had awakened. The observation caste was trained to study prey. For thousands of years, they had watched civilizations before the harvest began, learning their weaknesses, their patterns, their breaking points. Every species had a breaking point. The observation caste always found it. They sent 12 scouts to human space, hidden in ships disguised as asteroids. For 6 months, they watched and listened and recorded everything they could find about this strange new species that had killed a Hive commander. The data they collected was confusing. Humans were weak. Their bodies were made of soft tissue and thin bones that broke easily. They needed constant supplies of water and food. They could not survive in vacuum. They could not see in darkness. They could not hear frequencies that most species considered basic. By every physical measurement, humans should have been classified as one of the most fragile intelligent species in the galaxy. Their technology was crude. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were primitive. A single warrior, properly equipped, could kill dozens of humans without difficulty. An assault team could take an entire human city in hours. And yet, the observation caste found anomalies in the data, strange patterns that did not fit their models. They watched a human soldier on a training exercise take a wound that should have ended the fight. A metal fragment had torn through his leg, severing muscles and blood vessels. Any rational creature would have stopped, called for medical help, accepted that the exercise was over. Instead, the human wrapped cloth around the wound, picked up his weapon, and continued fighting for another 2 hours. When asked about it later, he said he did not want to let his team down. They watched a human rescue worker enter a burning building to save a stranger's child. The building was collapsing. The smoke was thick enough to kill. Every calculation said the rescue worker would die. She went in anyway and carried the child out through flames that left burns across 40% of her body. She survived. When asked why she had taken such a risk, she seemed confused by the question. "There was a kid in there," she said, as if that explained everything. They studied human history and found something that disturbed them deeply. Humans had spent most of their existence fighting each other. They had developed weapons specifically designed to kill other humans: nuclear bombs, chemical weapons, biological agents. They had killed hundreds of millions of their own kind in wars over territory, resources, and ideas. This was not unusual. Many species fought among themselves before achieving space travel. What disturbed the observation cast was how humans talked about these wars. They called them tragedies, but they also called them necessary. They mourned the dead, but they also celebrated the survivors. They said things like freedom is not free, and some things are worth dying for, and acceptable losses. Acceptable losses. The phrase appeared again and again in human military doctrine. It meant that humans planned for their own deaths. They built death into their strategies. They sent soldiers into battles knowing many would not return, and the soldiers went willingly, even eagerly. The observation cast had never encountered this before. Other species fought to survive. Humans seemed to fight for something else entirely, something the hive mind could not quite understand. They observed a human colony called New Helsinki during a viral outbreak. A disease had spread through the population, killing 1 in 10 infected. Standard procedure for any civilized species would be to quarantine the sick and wait for the plague to burn itself out. Let the weak die so the strong could survive. This was logical. This was efficient. Instead, human medical workers volunteered to enter the quarantine zone. They knew the disease was often fatal. They knew they might never see their families again. They went anyway because the sick needed help and someone had to provide it. 37 medical workers died. The outbreak was contained. The surviving colonists built a memorial with 37 names carved in stone. The observation cast compiled their report and transmitted it to the Supreme Nexus. Their conclusion was clear. Humans were physically inferior, technologically backward, and strategically irrational. They should be easy prey. But the report also included a warning. Species demonstrates unpredictable threat responses. Recommend immediate full-scale harvest before behavioral anomalies can spread to other populations. The Supreme Nexus agreed. The grand harvest would begin within 1 standard year. What they did not know was that humanity was also watching them. Admiral James had served in 3 colonial conflicts before the 442B massacre. He was 61 years old, with gray hair and a face lined by decades of difficult decisions. He had lost friends in battle. He had sent young soldiers to their deaths. He understood war in a way that most humans preferred not to think about. When news of 442B reached Earth, was given command of humanity's response. The United Territorial Command expected him to build defenses, to prepare evacuation routes, to find ways to delay the inevitable. They did not expect what he actually did. He read every report the Galactic Concord had ever produced about them. He interviewed refugees from harvested worlds. He analyzed 12,000 years of military operations, looking for patterns, weaknesses, anything that could be exploited. What he found surprised him. They had never lost a war. They had never even fought a difficult war. Every species they encountered either surrendered quickly or was destroyed quickly. They had overwhelming force, yes, but they also had something else. They had a reputation. They were feared so completely that most species gave up before the fighting even started. Shared his conclusions with the Galactic Concord during a diplomatic conference. The Etherian ambassador and representatives from a dozen other species listened in silence as he spoke. "They've never fought anyone who wasn't afraid of them," he said. "Their entire strategy is based on terror. They show up with overwhelming force. They make an example of anyone who resists, and everyone else falls in line. It's worked for 12,000 years." Because it is effective, the Etherian ambassador said. Resistance against thee is suicide. Maybe, said. But what happens when they face an enemy that doesn't care about suicide? What happens when they face an enemy that treats death as a tactical option rather than a failure condition? The room was silent. The other species looked at with something between horror and fascination. You cannot be serious, a delegate said. You would sacrifice your entire species just to hurt them. Smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'm not talking about sacrifice. I'm talking about making them pay a price they've never had to pay before. Every ship we destroy costs them resources. Every soldier we kill costs them time. And if we make the cost high enough, maybe they'll decide we're not worth the trouble. They will simply send more ships, the Etherian ambassador said. More soldiers. They have resources beyond counting. Then we'll make them count, said. We'll make them feel every loss. We'll make them understand that humans are not prey. We are something else. Something they've never had to deal with before. He paused and looked around the room at the assembled representatives of species, who had bent their knees to the fore. We are the species that runs toward the fire, and we're going to teach the what that means. The other delegates thought he was insane. Perhaps he was. But as returned to Earth to begin planning Operation Prometheus, he carried with him one piece of knowledge that gave him hope. Had killed a hive commander with a cargo ship and a reactor overload. One human woman had done what no other species had done in 3,000 years. Imagine what humanity could do if they all fought like her. The fleet arrived at expecting easy prey. 50 harvester ships, the same number that had taken 442B, emerged from imperfect formation. The hive commander, a veteran of 600 successful harvests, surveyed the system with confidence. Station was humanity's oldest off-world colony, built in the century after they had first learned to travel between stars. 3 million humans lived there, working in factories and research labs, raising families in habitat domes beneath the dim red light of their adopted sun. It was exactly the kind of target the preferred, large enough to be worth harvesting, small enough to fall quickly. The hive commander broadcast the standard message. You have been selected. Prepare for processing. Silence. No response from the colony. No evacuation ships launching. No desperate pleas for mercy. Just silence and darkness. The hive commander was not concerned. Sometimes prey froze when predators appeared. It was a common response, a failure of the nervous system when faced with overwhelming fear. The humans had probably abandoned their posts, hiding in corners, waiting to be collected. He ordered ground forces to secure the colony infrastructure. 5,000 warriors boarded assault craft and descended toward the station. They were halfway to the surface when the fusion reactors exploded. Not one reactor, all of them. Every power plant on station detonated simultaneously, converting the entire colony into a ball of nuclear fire. The assault craft were caught in the blast wave. 3,000 warriors died in an instant, burned to ash before they could even understand what was happening. The harvester fleet was close enough to feel the explosion. 18 ships took critical damage from debris and radiation. Their shields, designed to deflect weapons fire, had not been raised against a threat that no longer existed. The hive commander stared at his displays in confusion. The humans had destroyed their own colony. They had killed their own people. This made no sense. Prey did not destroy themselves. Prey tried to survive. Then the human ships emerged from the asteroid belt. They had been hiding for 6 days, running silent, their engines cold, their crews surviving on emergency rations and recycled air. 200 attack craft, small and fast and armed with weapons that should not have worried a fleet. But the fleet was damaged, the fleet was confused, and the humans did not fight like any enemy that had faced before. The first wave of human pilots flew directly at the largest harvester ships. They did not try to dodge defensive fire. They did not try to survive. They accelerated to maximum speed and aimed for critical systems, engines and reactors and weapons arrays. When their ships were destroyed, which happened to most of them, the explosions tore holes in armor. The Hive commander watched in disbelief as a human pilot, his craft crippled and burning, steered the wreckage into a harvester's bridge section. The impact killed the pilot instantly. It also killed the ship's command staff and left the vessel drifting without guidance. This was not combat, this was something else, something they had no word for. Admiral commanded the battle from a stealth ship hidden among the asteroids. He watched the casualty reports come in, human ships winking out of existence one by one, and he felt each loss like a wound. These were his people. These were pilots and Marines who had volunteered for missions they knew they would not survive. But they were doing what he had asked them to do. They were making the pay. "Tell the second wave to focus on the damaged ships," he ordered. "Don't let them repair, keep the pressure on." The second wave was different from the first. These pilots were not flying suicide missions. They were skilled fighters, veterans of colonial skirmishes, using the chaos of the battle to strike at weak points. They destroyed sensor arrays and communication nodes, blinding the enemy fleet, breaking the coordination that made the so effective. The Hive commander tried to restore order. He called for reinforcements from the rear of the formation. He ordered his remaining assault craft to pursue the human fighters. He did everything his training told him to do. It was not enough. Because while the space battle raged, human Marines had boarded 4 damaged harvester ships through holes torn in their armor. The Marines wore vacuum suits and carried weapons designed for close combat. They fought through corridors filled with warriors, taking losses with every step, leaving their dead behind as they pushed deeper into the enemy vessels. Sergeant Major Diana Torres led one of the boarding teams. She was 52 years old, a grandmother twice over, and she had volunteered for this mission knowing she would never see her again. Her team had started with 40 Marines. By the time they reached the engine room of the harvester they had boarded, only 11 were left. "Plant the charges," she ordered. "We have 3 minutes before their security forces pin us down." A young Marine named worked the explosives with shaking hands. "Sergeant Major, there's no extraction plan. How do we get out?" Torres looked at him with something like kindness. "We don't, son. That was never the plan. We're here to make sure this ship never harvests another human world. That's the mission. That's all that matters." Nodded slowly. His hands stopped shaking. He finished planting the charges. 2 minutes later, the harvester's engine exploded. The ship broke apart, spilling debris and bodies into the void. Sergeant Major Torres and her team died instantly. So did 300. The battle lasted 19 hours. When it finally ended, they had destroyed station completely. 3 million humans were dead or captured. The human attack fleet had been reduced to scattered survivors fleeing into deep space. But they had lost 31 ships, more ships than they had lost in the previous 200 years combined. They had lost thousands of warriors, dozens of commanders, and something far more valuable than all of that. They had lost the certainty that they could not be hurt. The Etherian ambassador received reports of the battle through diplomatic channels. She read them 3 times, unable to believe what she was seeing. Then she composed a message to her, a message that would be shared quietly among the species of the galactic conquered. The humans did not win at. They could not win, but they made the pay a price that no other species has ever extracted. They destroyed their own colony to damage the enemy fleet. They flew suicide missions. They boarded enemy ships with no extraction plan. She paused, searching for words to describe what she had witnessed. It is like watching a creature chew off its own limb to escape a trap. It is horrifying. It is irrational. And it is the first time in 12,000 years that anyone has made the bleed. Across the galaxy, other species read her message and felt something they had not felt in. They felt the first faint stirring of hope. Admiral retreated to a hidden base in a nameless asteroid field. He had lost 90% of his forces. He had failed to save station. By any reasonable measure, the battle had been a defeat. But he had learned something important. They could be hurt. They could be confused. They could be made to feel something that looked very much like fear. That was enough. That was a start. He began planning the next phase of the war. The Supreme Nexus had ruled for 6,000 years. It was not a single mind but a collection of minds, the greatest commanders and strategists of the species linked together in a network of shared thought. When they reached a decision, it was absolute. When they committed resources, they did so without hesitation. After the Supreme Nexus made a decision, the humans would be destroyed completely. Not harvested, not enslaved, but eliminated. Every world they had touched would be sterilized. Every ship they had built would be melted into slag. Their very memory would be erased from the galaxy. The Grand Armada mobilized for the first time in 6,000 years. 1,000 warships, the greatest concentration of military power in history, gathered at the edge of human space. They carried enough firepower to crack planets and enough warriors to conquer 100 civilizations. Admiral watched them come and knew that conventional warfare was no longer possible. Humanity had hurt yes, but they had also awakened a giant. The Grand Armada would crush any fleet humanity could assemble. They would burn every colony, every station, every place where humans had ever lived. So did not assemble a fleet. Instead, he gave an order that horrified even his own officers. "Scatter," he said. "Everyone scatters. No more fixed positions, no more territory to defend. We become ghosts." Human colonies evacuated. Not to other colonies, but into the darkness between stars. Small ships, family groups, communities of survivors disappearing into the void where no one could find them. They took everything they could carry and destroyed everything they could not. They arrived at Earth expecting a final battle. They found a dead world, not dead from their weapons, but dead from human hands. The population had been evacuated to hidden locations across the galaxy. The cities had been demolished. The factories had been dismantled. Even the farms had been burned, leaving nothing but ash and bare rock. A message had been carved into the surface of the moon, letters large enough to be visible from orbit. "Come and find US." The Grand Armada spread out across human space, hunting for survivors. They found empty stations and abandoned colonies. They found ships drifting without power, their crews long gone. They found traps, bombs left behind in places where scouts would look, killing dozens of warriors for every empty world secured. And they found humans. Always they found humans. Not armies, not fleets, just small groups, cells of fighters who appeared from nowhere, struck hard, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. A supply convoy ambushed in an asteroid field, its cargo of fuel and food destroyed. A commander assassinated in his quarters by a human who had hidden in the ventilation system for 3 weeks, surviving on recycled water and hate. A research station sabotaged, its data corrupted, its scientists killed by a bomb that detonated during a routine meeting. They had never experienced guerrilla warfare. Their hive mind made them efficient but inflexible. They thought in terms of territory and resources, battles and campaigns. They did not understand an enemy who had no territory to defend, no capital to threaten, no leadership to kill. Every time they destroyed a human cell, 2 more appeared somewhere else. Every time they secured a system, something exploded in a system they had already cleared. The humans seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, a constant presence that could not be pinned down or eliminated. Worse, the humans seemed to enjoy it. Captured fighters did not beg for mercy. They smiled. They made jokes. One human, taken alive after a failed assassination attempt, spent his last hours teaching his captors human folk songs. He was still singing when they executed him. The psychological impact on individual was severe. They had never known fear, not really. They had always been the predators, the hunters, the ones who made other species afraid. But now something was changing. Warriors began hesitating before entering unfamiliar spaces. Commanders requested additional security for their quarters. Scouts reported feeling watched even when their sensors showed nothing. The hive mind tried to suppress these feelings, to maintain discipline and focus, but the infection spread anyway. A commander named kept a personal log, which was unusual for his species. The hive mind frowned on individual expression, but found that he needed to express something that the collective could not understand. "We destroyed he wrote. "We took their colonies. We killed millions of them. By every measure we have won. And yet they keep fighting. They appear from the darkness, they hurt us, and they disappear again. We cannot predict them. We cannot understand them. They do not behave like prey. They do not behave like predators. They behave like something else, something that should not exist." His final entry, written hours before a human infiltrator killed him with a knife made from sharpened debris, read simply, "I am afraid. I have never been afraid before. I do not like it." The Galactic Conquered watched the war from a safe distance, and something remarkable began to happen. Species that had submitted to the force started to ask questions. If the humans could hurt the monsters, could others do the same? If the invincible could be made to bleed, were they really invincible? The Etherian Dominion, the oldest and most powerful of the conquered species, made a quiet decision. They began shipping supplies to human-resistant cells, medical equipment, food, weapons. Nothing that could be traced back to them, nothing that could provoke retaliation, but enough to keep the humans fighting a little longer. Other species followed. The sent encrypted communications equipment. The Crystalline Collective provided sensor data on fleet movements. The Thousand Worlds Coalition opened their borders to human refugees, hiding them in populations too large for them to search. None of this was enough to change the outcome of the war. The humans were still losing, still dying, still being pushed further and further into the darkness between stars. But they were not losing quietly. They were not dying without cost. 3 years into the war, the Grand Armada had been reduced by 40%. Not through battles, but through attrition, through the constant grinding pressure of an enemy who refused to surrender, who refused to stop, who treated every breath as another opportunity to hurt their conquerors. The Supreme Nexus analyzed the data and reached a conclusion that surprised even them. The war was no longer profitable. The resources spent hunting humans exceeded the resources humans could provide. Every world secured cost more than it was worth. Every ship destroyed cost more than it would ever harvest. This had never happened before. They had never fought a war where the mathematics turned against them. They had never faced an enemy willing to pay any price, bear any burden, lose any battle, as long as the paid a price too. In his hidden command center, Admiral received intelligence reports from conquered allies. He saw the fleet numbers declining. He saw the growing hesitation in enemy operations. He saw something that looked very much like doubt spreading through the hive mind. He was 74 years old now. He had not seen his family in 3 years. He had sent thousands of humans to their deaths. He had watched colonies burn and species tremble and monsters learn the meaning of fear. And he knew, with a certainty that warmed his tired heart, that humanity was going to win. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not even in his lifetime, but eventually, inevitably, they would decide that humanity was not worth the trouble. Because that was the thing about humans. They did not know when to quit. They did not understand impossible. They looked at certain death and said maybe and kept fighting until maybe became reality. The monsters had finally found something they could not digest. They had found their match. The Supreme Nexus had not convened a full strategic council in 4,000 years. The last time had been during the conquest of the Etherian Dominion, when the oldest civilization in the galaxy had finally bent its knee to power. That council had lasted 1 hour and resulted in terms of surrender that had shaped galactic politics ever since. This council lasted 3 days. The data was undeniable. The Grand Armada had lost 400 ships to human attacks, not in great battles, not in decisive engagements, but in 1,000 small wounds that had bled the fleet dry. Supply lines were under constant attack. Commanders were being assassinated faster than they could be replaced. Morale among individuals had dropped to levels that the hive mind struggled to explain. And the humans were still fighting. 3 years of total war had not broken them. The destruction of Earth had not broken them. The loss of millions of their people had not broken them. They continued to emerge from the darkness, strike, and disappear. They continued to die with smiles on their faces and songs on their lips. They continued to treat their own lives as ammunition to be spent against the enemy. The Supreme Nexus processed this information and felt something unfamiliar. It was not fear, not exactly. The collective mind of those was too vast for simple fear, but it was something close. A recognition that the universe contained things they did not understand, creatures that did not fit their models, prey that refused to behave like prey. The debate within the Nexus was fierce. Some elements argued for continued escalation, for the commitment of reserves that had not been deployed in. Surely, they argued, overwhelming force would eventually break human resistance. Surely even the most irrational species would surrender when faced with absolute destruction. Other elements disagreed. They pointed to the mathematics, the cold equations that had always guided expansion. The harvest of humanity would require resources that exceeded humanity's value. Every ship sent to human space was a ship that could not be used elsewhere. Every warrior killed by humans was a warrior who could not harvest other, more profitable species. They did not think of themselves as evil. They did not think of themselves as cruel. They were simply efficient. They took what they needed from lesser species because that was the natural order, because the strong had always consumed the weak. Mercy was inefficient. Compassion was wasteful. Only results mattered. And the results said that humanity was not worth the cost. After 3 days of deliberation, the Supreme Nexus reached a decision. Humanity would be designated a prohibited species. Their space would be quarantined. No would enter it. The remaining humans would be left alone, allowed to rebuild their shattered civilization in peace. It was not surrender. They did not surrender. It was a strategic reallocation of resources, a recognition that some prey was too troublesome to harvest. The official records would describe it as mercy, as the graciously sparing a primitive species that had shown unexpected spirit. Everyone in the galaxy knew the truth. They broadcast their declaration across all frequencies, in every language known to galactic civilization. They spoke of the generous decision to spare humanity, of the wisdom of the Supreme Nexus, of the bright future that awaited both species if they could learn to coexist in peace. Admiral received the transmission in his command center, surrounded by the ragged survivors of humanity's defense forces. They had fought for 3 years. They had lost billions of their people. They had sacrificed everything they had and everything they were. And they had won. Composed a response. It was brief, just 12 words, but it would be remembered for centuries. We accept your surrender. Do not return. We will not be so merciful. The message spread across the galaxy at the speed of light. Species that had trembled before the read it and felt something shift inside them. The monsters could be beaten. The invincible could be humbled. All it took was someone crazy enough to try. The Etherian ambassador, who had watched the war with growing fascination, wrote a report that would become required reading at every military academy in the Concord. She spent weeks trying to explain what had happened, how a minor species with inferior technology had accomplished what no one else had managed in 12,000 years. Her conclusion was simple. They are predators. They evolved on a death world surrounded by creatures that wanted to kill them. They became the ultimate hunters, the apex of their environment. They are very good at what they are, but humans evolved differently. Humans did not become apex predators. They remained somewhere in the middle of their food chain, surrounded by animals that could kill them easily. They should have died out. Instead, they survived. They survived by being stubborn. They survived by refusing to accept their place in the natural order. They survived by fighting things that should have destroyed them. She paused in her writing, searching for words to capture what she had witnessed. The expected prey. They found something else, something that looked at certain death and said no, something that treated survival as optional and victory as mandatory, something that would rather burn than bend. The humans have a word for this. They call it spite. It is perhaps their most defining characteristic. 5 years after the war ended, a memorial was built on the restored colony of 442b. The planet had been resettled by survivors, families who had hidden in the darkness between stars and emerged when they declared their withdrawal. They planted crops in soil that had once been soaked with blood. They built homes on foundations that had once been rubble. They raised children who would never know the fear their parents had lived with. The memorial stood in the center of the largest city, a tall pillar of black stone with names carved into its surface. Was at the top the cargo hauler captain who had started everything with her desperate attack on the command ship. Below her were millions of other names, soldiers and civilians, fighters and refugees, everyone who had died to make this moment possible. The inscription at the base of the memorial was simple. It read, "They asked what made us dangerous. We showed them. We are the species that runs toward the fire." Admiral was there for the dedication ceremony. He was 82 years old now, tired and gray, but his eyes still held the fire that had burned in them since the day he had decided to fight the unbeatable enemy. He stood before the memorial and remembered everyone he had lost, everyone he had sent to their deaths, everyone who had trusted him to find a way to win. "We paid a terrible price," he said to the crowd that had gathered. We lost billions of our brothers and sisters. We lost things that can never be recovered. Some will say the price was too high. Some will say we should have surrendered, should have accepted our fate, should have bent our knees to save lives. He paused and looked at the names on the memorial. But those names up there, they knew something that our enemies never understood. They knew that some things are worth more than survival. Freedom is worth more than survival. Dignity is worth more than survival. The chance for our children to grow up without chains, without fear, without masters, that is worth everything. The crowd was silent, listening. The thought they were dealing with prey. They were wrong. They were dealing with humans, and humans do not know how to give up. We do not know how to stop fighting. We do not know how to accept the impossible. He smiled, and for a moment he looked young again, full of the stubborn hope that had carried humanity through the darkest war in history. The galaxy knows now what we are. The predators know now what we can do. Let them remember. Let them tell their children and their children's children. When the humans came to the stars, they taught the monsters how to be afraid. The memorial stands to this day. Visitors come from across the galaxy to see it, to read the names, to understand what happened when the most dreaded species in existence met their match. They still rule their empire. They still harvest other species, still consume civilizations, still spread fear wherever they go. But they do not enter human space. They do not speak of the war. In their collective memory, the humans are listed as a prohibited species, too dangerous to touch, too stubborn to break. It is, perhaps, the greatest victory in human history. Not because humanity won through superior strength or technology or numbers. Not because they found some secret weakness in their enemy. They won because they refused to lose. They won because they would rather die than surrender. They won because somewhere in the strange tangle of human psychology, there is a part that looks at impossible odds and says, "Let's find out." The galaxy learned a lesson during those years of blood and fire. They learned that the size of the fight matters less than the fight in the species. They learned that predators can be taught fear. They learned that sometimes, the only way to survive is to become something that the predators cannot stomach. And they learned never, ever, to underestimate humanity. Because humans run toward the fire, it's what they do, it's what they have always done. It's what makes them dangerous.